Hello and welcome to Ramblings of a 42-Year-Old Man. Chris Smith here with you today. Today we're going to talk about another pair of movies, kind of similar to a couple days ago when I talked about Horror in the High Desert. These are a pair that I caught together the other day, and they are the third Saturday in October and the third Saturday in October Part 5. If that sounds weird, don't worry, we'll explain them. So both of these movies were made, filmed, and released together. And the backstory of it, I guess you would say, the purpose of it really is to kind of homage like the big 80s slasher series, like Friday the 13th or the Halloweens or the Nightmare on Elm Street. How you would kind of have your original movie that was kind of the more tame one, definitely more older style in the 70s kind of aesthetic, maybe a little slower, a little more build up, and then the kills and the stuff of your slasher are a little more tame than you might get going forward. And then part 5 is supposed to show you what these series turned into over time. So like Nightmare on Elm Street 5 is one of the, not Nightmare on Elm Street 5, sorry, Friday the 13th 5. Compared to Friday the 13th Part 1 is a huge jump in kills and blood and the aesthetic of the mid 80s versus the early 80s or late 70s, is definitely a different feel. And this is going for that. And they're doing it. I wouldn't say either of these movies are particularly good, but I think that is exactly what they're going for. They are making a ripoff to Halloween and a ripoff to Friday the 13th Part 5. I mean, they're purposely, I don't want to say making bad movies, because I don't think they're bad, but they're making it to exactly what it felt like watching these ripoffs of Halloween back in the late 70s, early 80s. And these cash-ins on the serial killer movies in the middle of the 80s, late 80s, early 90s even. So the third Saturday of October, the first one, is definitely taking place in the late 70s. It is made in the style of all those late 70s Halloween ripoffs that you would see, the Prowlers, the Burning, which are good versions of those, but there are a whole lot of dregs of that kind of ripoff as well. This is playing to that kind of a movie where it's super slow. There's the killer out there. There's a kind of heroic character who's trying to stop the killer, and then you got a whole bunch of kids who are just kind of partying and hanging out, and then eventually the killer gets into the house with them. And it's if you were going to the movies in the late 70s, early 80s, you would see a ton of these kind of movies coming out after the success of Halloween, and this is playing directly to that. It's got a very 70s aesthetic. The film grain makes the film look old. The wardrobes are definitely, honestly, almost more 60s than 70s, really. You spend a lot of time watching this girl doing cocaine and dancing around the house. I mean, way too much time, honestly. But again, I think that's what they're going for. They're going for, this is what these ripoff films in the late 70s looked like. And they did. They were a lot like this. It was a whole lot of nothing, 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 nothing. Oh, here's a serial killer. Nothing, 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 nothing. Oh, he's back again. Nothing, nothing, nothing. That's what you pretty much had with these really low-budget cash-in movies. And it plays just like that. You got the really slow burn. There's finally some kills near the end. Very little blood, just death and done. And he moves on. The killer gets caught in the end, and then he disappears. Boom, Halloween, right? Your original Halloween movie, but obviously done in a style of the cheap cash-ins that we had, not the greatness of the original Halloween. And then Part 5 is kind of they skip. There is no Part 2. There's no Part 3. There's no Part 4. They jump out into Part 5, so you can kind of see what would happen if this original movie had kind of done the Friday the 13th sequels every year for 10 years deal. And Part 5 takes place in the early 90s, and so this aesthetic is again where the other one was definitely felt like 70s. This one does feel very early 90s, possibly more like mid to late 80s to me, more than early 90s. I think they might have gotten a little bit mixed with some of their homages there, but it's definitely more like what you would see with these sequels. There's more blood, there's more kills, there's more like almost torture kind of scenes, just so they could show off some more blood. Pretty much the only thing that they miss with this is they don't have the girls being naked the entire movie. That's pretty much the only miss that you have, because otherwise it's very, very similar to what you would have seen in the mid to late 80s. Now it is trying to be early 90s, and like I said, it almost does feel more mid-late 80s, but it's kind of what it is. But they're again definitely homaging these movies weren't good. These movies were definitely cash-ins and trying to just make a buck real quick on a cheapo movie, and it's made that way. So while I can't say the movie is good, I also think that's exactly what it's going for. And so, your original one, the very first one that's supposed to take place in the 70s, is your slow burn with the quick kills at the end. Rough acting. All of them, honestly, have rough acting, but I think that's a choice that they're making. I don't recognize any of the actors in any of them, but I have a feeling that the plan going in was act like you're in a cheap, low budget, no budget horror movie from the 70s trying to rip off Halloween. Or cheap, low-budget movie from the late 80s trying to rip off the Friday the 13th series. I think that was the plan going forward, and they did. They did exactly that. It is like you're watching a cheap, no-budget, lo-fi version of a classic horror movie. So, again, while I can't say I would necessarily recommend either of them, I think they are doing exactly what they set out to do. So if you're kind of just into like the old style slasher movies of the 80s, it's kind of a fun watch just to kind of see somebody try to homage that feel of those series. But yeah, I definitely can't recommend it as a good movie to anybody, either one of them. But they're interesting to watch. Me being that I've watched so many of the original slasher movies, it is like I can tell all these homages that they're paying tribute to throughout, and I get it. I do get it, and so I enjoy it in that way. It just makes it hard for me to do as a recommendation. So I believe that, I don't know if they're going to do more. I don't know if there'll be, at the very end of part 5 says there will be a part 6, but again, is that playing into the old slasher aesthetic of the 80s? There's always going to be more, possibly. So I don't know if there'll be more, if this was just a quickie experiment that they did, that they're gonna kind of just roll with these two films. But both of those came out early this year. You can find them on VOD. I don't believe they're on any of the streaming services just yet. I think you'd have to probably rent them on Amazon, or find them on any VOD service that you have. Yeah, those are out now. That, again, is called the third Saturday of October, which I may have forgot to mention the idea of the title. I think they're trying to be the goofiness of, Halloween's a specific date. Friday the 13th is a kind of a random day. I mean, most of the Friday the 13th movies don't even take place on Friday the 13th, so it's kind of like whatever. So I think they just pulled out this date, and this date happens to be the 3rd October. Saturday in October is a huge football day. In real life, it's actually the Alabama versus Tennessee football season. They always played on the 3rd Saturday in October. Is a big deal. In the movies, they're going with some smaller schools. I think it's like Alabama A&M and Tennessee Tech or something. Anyway, they made some made-up schools, I think. They pull that date from, a real thing. It is a real thing. But again, it's just very much a background to the story. Most of the characters throughout both movies are watching the football game on TV as the killer comes in and starts taking them out. So there's your kind of reason for the name. So again, the 3rd Saturday in October is part 1, part 5, both directed by Jay Burleson. Both you can catch on VOD. Yeah, again, I enjoyed them, but again, my sensibilities are a lot different than most people. So take that recommendation with a grain of salt, depending on what you enjoy. All right. Thank you as always for listening to me ramble. We'll talk again soon. Bye, Dada.